Hello everyone and welcome to Salve Women. Today we're going to talk about I am enough. And so in the article, it's entitled You Are Enough yesterday. And I really want to state that because now at this point, sometimes, it's totally understandable that you have to remind yourself of that. But then I have to ask myself, at what point did we start asking ourselves, or that we actually created that moment where we started to doubt? And whom has the power to make us feel that way? And I say this as a parent, I say this as a teacher, I say this as a self, because when you start to look around and marketably you start to see phrases that are being sold and that you're placing it all around you, and I am all about positive words around my house, and really things that can acclaim the thoughts that I'm feeling on the inside. And yet sometimes, I guess I'm going to put it out there, when you write the word I am enough, there's so much depth in that of feeling of what makes me feel like I have to assert this out loud in my mind, in my heart, in my soul, in my spirit, where I have to remind myself that yes, I am. And when I think about our children of today, and all the many things that we are running into at this time, pre-COVID times and in the anti-COVID, and who knows, hopefully we will be past all of this in ways that we look at it like any other virus in the past. And I think to myself, well, what are they fighting now, and how have we contributed to that, where perhaps we are sending the message to them that they are not enough and that they will continue to feel this way? Because at some point we have to take ourselves accountable of what it is that we're doing to promote that type of assertion, where we have to actually state it and say it and believe it, and what is it that we're causing ourselves and perhaps now we're putting onto our children that is making them feel the same way generationally. And so I have comprised of some of the things that I think when I look at my students, when I look at children and my own children, what are they continuing to fight that perhaps we as a generation may have contributed to have them feel. And the very first one is labels. Now, I remember being a child and thinking to not even having to think anything about who I am, and just being a child. And yet after a while, there are those that perhaps were raised to really start thinking about differences, and all of a sudden you were labeled into a certain category, and this your skin color, your gender, and it just didn't. It somehow baffled me silently, and yet I was quick enough to understand that I had to be about my game and able for me to then progress in the manner of respect. And here I am thinking now as an adult, it's like, okay, hold on. We raise our children to believe that they need to be themselves and they need to be proud of who they are and, continue on forth and driving forward. And yet, when I look back and reflectively, I think to myself, there were times where I felt that I had to move forward in the mindset of who is around me, and really, switching up to that idea and that message to others that I'm just as good, I'm just as strong, I'm just as capable. And so with these labels that we have now put onto our children, for them it is so much more. The components of labels, I really feel like now we are giving them more choices. It's like going through the cereal aisle when it used to be just a few. Now there's so many more that they have to consider. And being so young, I think to myself, don't you have a lifetime to make that decision? And why do you have to make that decision now? And not that I say that professionally to my students, but the only thing that I can say to them is just continue to do you until you find you. And then when you're ready to make that announcement or whatever it is that you feel you have to, that's when, it'll be your turn and your time to address. But do not feel that if anyone is pushing you to make that decision right now, because if that's the case, and if you are saying it, you got to own up to it, and then that is your decision. And yet at the same time, do not feel pressured to think that you are what other people say. You are who you say you are. And I empowered my own children, and I continue to empower my children the same way, and yet I know it is so difficult for them, because no matter what you say, no matter what you do, it'll never be perfect. It'll never be a perfect delivery into their heart, their mind, their body, and their spirit. They will have to ultimately make that decision. The next one is the historical truth. Now, and here's the deal. When you're talking about historical truth, we know that there are books, and yet there are different vantage points, there are different perspectives. And what you really have to do is read many. Just like I tell myself, read as different vantage points, different articles, because in the beginning I used to think there was only one. The first book that you read is the truth. And then I realized, goodness, no, as you become an adult, you realize your perspective's different of history, and another person's perspective of history is different. And this is why it's so important to have your eyes and your ears open and really listening in to what other people have to say now in the present time. And then historically, we also have to really read into everything, all that's been comprised of all the many stories that have been told, so that in our hearts, in our minds, we will then come to some understanding collectively, because they're all pieces of the puzzle, and everyone's words are messages to us to then make sense of it as a unified place of this world. We can go, okay, hold on, this is what it was. Now think about the exposure that our students and our children have now, where they have so much more to really take into, and they have to have a lot more reading and have a lot more listening because of all this technology that they have been blessed with. And we as well, we have to have that open mind to go, hold on, what is the historical truth, and what is my finding, and how much more findings do I need to really address to make sure that I have come to the real truth. And that is yet another fight that I feel our students and children are running into. And how have we contributed to that type of truth? What truth are we speaking? Because I know there were times when my mom said some things, and then I look back and, bless her heart, and I look back and I would think to myself, this is, somewhat fabricated, or maybe a little bit exaggerated. And I was so glad to have read on to then find my own truth. And it is my truth to own. So the next one is social media. Social media goes along with the labels, goes along with the historical truth. But the social media, that fight is really interesting, in that there's so many types out there. With all the many apps, with all these applications that are pushing these kids to go, look at me and, do this and do that. And all of a sudden your peers, now imagine your peers, your best friend to the left and to the right, and just a few others were around you to influence you. It is no longer that. You have friends that don't even really have to be met personally, and they could be across the world, and you all of a sudden are listening in to what they have to say. So think about the social media in such a global aspect, that now these children, our new generation, are having to fight as to what to do and what not to do. And I always say that people are examples of what to be and what not to be, and yet there are some people out there that have exposed themselves in a manner where you aren't too sure, is that something that I want to follow? And when we say we aren't too sure, it's because perhaps as adults we ain't even aware what our children are actually viewing and what they are actually starting to question. And not always do we have that communication with them. And if you are one of the few that can communicate with them openly, that is awesome. But I also know that there are personalities out there that, even though you may think they're open, and even as an adult, and we can reflectively think about that, as open as you think you may be, there are thoughts in here that are secret, and it's like a vault that you are still processing yourself and you're not ready to release. And what are you allowing to enter in here that you haven't even exposed out into the world, to the people that you normally talk to? So again, social media, how have we contributed to that, and what are some of the things that we're listening to and that we're viewing, and perhaps our children and our students are starting to see, wow, okay, maybe that's acceptable to them, maybe that's acceptable to us. So how are we contributing to that? And then, of course, the fight of the self. no matter what, and with all the many parts that I've already discussed, there's this always us, that's within us, and it goes with that I am enough, in addition to all the things that I have discussed, is where is it where you have then said, this is my decision, I am accountable for this, I am not holding anyone else accountable, and all of a sudden you think to yourself, wait, hold on, what is myself, and what strength do I have to say this is my own this is my own way, this is my own journey, this is all my decision. I hold myself accountable fully for everything, because as a child, as a person who is just growing up, how much weight do we put on on a child or person, just a young adult who is just trying to make sense of the world? How much accountability do we place on them, and how have we contributed to such accountability where they can own it, and yet have we placed some impact on their lives where all of a sudden we say to them, oh yeah, that's a decision you've made, and yet have we influenced that self to become, and rather than for them to take the journey and decide for themselves, what is that self that's making that decision? How have we contributed to really creating the selves around us, and as they're trying to make sense of who they are? That is a fight yet that I think even as adults we still go, what is myself? Who am I? And last but not least, fighting the good fight. Think about all the many good that we used to know, right? It was very clear. This is what you do. This is how you show respect. This is how you speak. And yet, now culturally, even though we have some basic fundamentals of what it is, there are those now that are very, very slick and are stealthily going into the hearts, the minds, the bodies, and spirits of our next generation, and starting to really create some confusion of the good fight. And we know, okay, ultimately everyone that can really have that sense of what is right is doing that. We have our armors up, we have our swords up, we have our shields up, and everything that we are doing to make sure that we're fighting the good fight. And yet, how have we contributed to showing either strength or weakness in fighting the good fight? Because are we also doing the same ultimately as adults for the next generation? How have we created that stance for our next generation to go? Are we yes, we are fighting the good fight, and you will follow to continue on to fight the good fight. How have we done that? And how have we created that influence to say, when I go, you will continue to fight the good fight, and you will continue to be right, living in the life of righteousness? How have we contributed to living in a life of righteousness? And so, in the words of my mother, God bless us all. May you think positively of all the many messages that I have given today in regards to you are enough, because ultimately the generation that is fighting everything that they have, just a few of the things that I am saying that they are fighting, perhaps many, many things that you can even think about. Think about you, and how are you expelling yourself in this world where you are telling everybody else, I am enough? And are you believing it in your heart? And are you really creating that aura that when people see you, they know, hey, they've got it together? And if you don't, guess what? You're not alone. But we have to think generationally, what kind of world do we want for our children? And that is my message to you today. Have a great day. Yes, you are enough. Let's be about it. Have a good one.